20. Playing a round of liar's dice after a favorite meal of chicken curry stuffed burritos with sticky rice, Jan was feeling lucky. Tall and thin, with a stable job, reliable car, plenty of friends, and some savings in the bank, what could go wrong? $5 I win the next round, Daddy. You're going to need that, he said after a pregnant pause. Your mother and I, well, we think it's time you find your own wings. Stopping mid-shake to allow the wave of panic to completely overtake the earlier unbridled confidence, Jan was suddenly unable to speak or to know what to do. Rent or buy? How much money should I have? Roommate or small place? What if I lose my job? What if my car dies? The next day, Jan's mother suggested looking at a model for a small modular house, the PPoD. At least you won't be paying rent, dear. 3 months later, Jan owned land and the dock, and would be one of the few Americans never to pay rent for housing. 25. Jan's mother beamed as she greeted friends and family, laughing graciously each time a new guest offered the most repeated quip of the day. What are the odds of Jan falling in love with Jan? For months, Jan and Jan had walked through what seemed like 100 open houses. After a couple of dozen, either could cut through the realtor speak with ease. Listen to this one, said Jan. Affordable starter home with potential and room for expansion. Cozy nooks and old-world charm overlooking a large natural garden. Translation? A cramped old house with a dozen little dark rooms, an unfinished basement, and an overgrown backyard with no garage. Jan wasn't keen about moving, but Jan wasn't sure about modular home living. On the other hand, nothing they had seen and could afford jumped out at them. Equally fond of Jan's current location, they decided to begin the marriage there and move, if they felt the urge, later. They agreed the dock wouldn't be enough room for both of them, as Jan telecommuted regularly, spending at least several days a month working from home. They decided their wedding present to each other would be the first edition. Pod 1 plugged in July 18th, after 2 weeks in Reno, Nevada. 30. Harley is born 2 days before Halloween. After some animated discussions on the topic, the Jans, a nickname given by Jan's parents, decide Jan should stay home with the kids until they reach school age. The financial consequences of this decision derail their plan to enlarge the house just after the baby arrives. In December, Jan gets an unexpected bonus. In January, a raise. During an unexpected 2-week furlough for Jan in February, Jan picks up a cash job doing some data entry from an accountant friend. Coming home one night with a fistful of $100 bills, Jan counts them off as they drop one by one into Harley's crib. By March, Jan is at wit's end. Stunned by how much floor space a baby requires, activity center, high chair, bead maze, stroller, Jan's old rocking horse, storage cube, bouncy seat, bassinet, goodnight moon. The Jans agree there is absolutely no possibility of waiting until Harley's second birthday for the house addition. Make the call, Jan tells Jan. Pod 2 plugged in April 15th, tax day. 35. Aiden, the Jan's second child, is born in spring. Confident the second child will be another good sleeper, Jan and Jan are unprepared for Aiden's more enthusiastic temperament. Harley is up all day, Aiden all night, Jan lamented one night at the dinner table. I can't escape the kids' voices 24/7. Admit it, we need a bigger house. Jan reminds Jan that would be impossible unless the kids' voices carry clear to Jan's office across town, and then calmly lobbies against a move. This is where our memories live. Realizing this signified the end of the discussion. The next day, Jan looks into a kit for a second-floor addition as a way of buying space and time. Both parents are amazed and horrified when Aiden starts walking at 10 months. A natural climber, Aiden does stairs at a year and manages to topple the TV cabinet at 15 months. The same day, as it happens, that Jan brings home a surprise for the children, a black lab puppy. The arrival of Rufus prompts Jan to order another pod, without even consulting Jan first. Construction of the mast starts in late April and is complete by mid-May. Pod 1 and 2 lifted upstairs. Pod 3, known thereafter as the quid pro quo room, is plugged in August 2nd. 40. In September, Jan is discharged from the shackles of parenthood, at least for 6 glorious hours every day. From 9 until 3, Monday through Friday, September through May, no play dates, trips to the zoo, birthday parties, trips to the children's museum, music classes, encounters with Jack's father, who's often drinking before lunch, or amateur puppet shows. If only we didn't have Rufus, Jan thinks, and then feels guilty. After 3 weeks of visiting with friends, sitting in the sun, and reading pulp novels, Jan is utterly bored. Not wanting to return to the 50-hour work week, which would mean the kids in an after-school program, Jan announces the plan at Saturday breakfast. I've always enjoyed fiddling with golf clubs, and I've made a couple of custom ones. I bet I could make and repair clubs for decent money when the kids are at school. Figuring on a modest investment with a relatively low risk, if the venture were a home-based business, the Jans add again. The neighborhood kids take to teasing Harley and Aiden about their house. "Your house is made of Legos," they yell while riding by on their bicycles. Pod 4 plugged in the Monday after Thanksgiving, in time for holiday guests. 45. She has osteoporosis? Jan asks into the phone. Don't they all get that, older women? Teeth clenched, brow furrowed, eyes narrowing, Jan asks as nicely as possible, "Why does this mean she has to come live with us?" "I like your mother just fine, but come on, Jan. Harley's got hockey practice every 10 minutes, and Aiden has about 2,000 friends that seem comfortable walking through our house any time of the day. Where will we put her? In the carport? Tell you what, I'll drive her to the hospital if she breaks her arm." Hearing a click on the other end, Jan slams the cordless down on the counter. "Well, for all the oil in Baghdad." Dolores moves into Jan's golf club pod in September, after the kids begin school. Jan moves her growing business into a new one upstairs, but only briefly. Disgruntled by a parent moving into the teen obscene, Harley's name for the upstairs, the kids lobby hard for a downstairs pod 6. "It'll be like your little retreat, Mom, and this will be ours. If you order by December 31st, you get the second pod for 25% off. Pod 5. 4 of us and Dolores, plugged in September 1st. Pod 6, the Caddy Shack, plugged in December 20th. 50. Jan gets laid off in July, a week after Harley's graduation party. "Looks like golf clubs are paying our way for the time being," Jan says when arriving home that night. Depressed and anxious about Harley's upcoming deployment, Jan goes to bed early and says little to anyone for the next 3 weeks. In early fall, Harley receives word of the conditions. Beginning in January, at least 2 years overseas. Jan, still unemployed, has become the go-to neighborhood handyman, earning a few bucks here and there by painting, fixing leaking pipes, installing a light fixture, even building a ferret habitat for Sheila's kids next door. The extra idle time seems to have something to do with Jan's increased alcohol consumption, Jan thinks, but decides to ignore it, at least for now. After the first of the year, the Jans agree to sell one of the pods. With only 4 in the house and Rufus under 3 feet of earth, they have some extra square footage upstairs and could use the money. Jan lands a job in May and celebrates by taking Jan to Chicago to see the White Sox play the Yankees. Pod 6, The Kid's Den, unplugged October 29th. 55. Jan is rear-ended during an April rainstorm. After a tense initial introduction, the 2 motorists survey the cars. They are surprised to find neither car damaged by the fender bender and agree they both feel fine. They shake hands more cordially, laugh about it, and part company. About 18 months later, Jan's lower back begins to hurt. Quite a bit. Why didn't I get the insurance information from that guy? Clipping the x-ray into the lightbox track, Dr. Bad News, that's what Jan calls her, sighs and frowns a bit. "It's not good, Jan, in my opinion. You're going to need a discectomy soon, unless you want to be in pain every day. Now, remind me why you decided to neglect to get health insurance, even catastrophic coverage, at your age?" "For my kid, going to college this fall," Jan answers. "Looking at the outrageous bill I'm getting from you, I hope Aiden becomes a damn doctor." Walking down the hall after the appointment, pausing to look at a photograph of Dr. Bad News shaking hands with the current governor, "A bloody common crook, if you ask Jan," he mutters under his breath. "Perhaps Aiden can charge you both $1 million for your pair of herniated, blood-clotted spleen cancers, whatever." Going to have to carve off another chunk of the house, Jan says, just before sitting down for dinner. Pod 5 surgically removed in May. 60. On a bright sunny day in June, Jan comes into Dolores' room and opens the blinds. "Wake up, Mom. I've got your favorite smoothie ready." Looking at a childhood picture on the dresser brings the giggles. "That's such a goofy picture of me. How come you framed that one?" The room suddenly feels too quiet. Still. "Mom?" Dolores is buried next to Stanley in Jan's rural hometown the following Sunday. Who are all these people, Jan wonders, examining the faces. How could I not know 2/3 of them? Jan expected the usual suspects from the church basement potlucks 45 years ago, not these strangers. Where was the Cool Whip salad, the potato chip hot dish, the teens sneaking cheap beer out behind the line of oaks? Bonnie and Dave came. Patrice, nope. Tyrone, nope. Gil, yes. Donnie Matsuoka, yes. Eleanor MacDonald, ugh, thank goodness, no. No show from Uncle Paul, or was it Pablo, now that he spent his winters in Cabo San Lucas. A month later, Jan found out Dolores had squirreled some money away. How could she have saved anything in her life? Seemed as if she'd already given everything she had to Harley and Aidan, who knew Grammy was an easy swindle for walking money. With no siblings, Jan would inherit everything. Was it shameful to be thinking about inherited money so soon after Mom's death? Not to mention some income from selling another pod? Pod 4, deceased, August 20th. 65. "It's a horse apiece," says Jan. "You don't even know what that means," Jan answers. "You've been delivering that line for 45 years, and I'm half convinced that you have no idea what you're talking about." "6 of one, half a dozen of the other," says Jan. "Good Lord, do you want to get rid of another pod, or not?" With Harley stationed in North Carolina, and Aidan engaged and living in an apartment across town, the third quid pro quo pod was pretty much full of excess baggage. Most of the stuff could go into mini-storage, if not the neighborhood garage sale. Old golf club tools, single Demitas teacups Dolores collected, Harley's hockey trophies, a half-dozen boxes of Aidan's science fiction novels, beanbag chairs embroidered with the kids' names, and at least a half-dozen crocheted Pabst Blue Ribbon beer can hats. Getting no response, Jan makes the executive decision. "We're getting rid of a room. We'll need the money when you quit working in April." Silence. "Hello? Is there anybody in there? What's caught your interest over there?" Looking over the table at the open classified section, Jan suddenly stands up so abruptly the chair topples to the floor, knocking over the trash can, spilling coffee grounds everywhere. Red in the face, arms braced against the table, Jan speaks slowly and forcefully. "Let me make this clear. Don't even think of bringing another dog into this house." Pod 3, unplugged, March 26th. 70. On the second tee, Jan's friend Beau invites Jan and Jan to come down to Sun City for a week in January. "You two should really get a place down there. Get out of the cold. Bunny and Pat run a place near us. Candy and Chris have one across the pool from ours. I think Mary and Everett are looking to come down this year. January through April. It's basically a party." By the second gin and tonic at the 19th hole, Jan's ready to call a realtor. "Bunny and Pat," Jan says with characteristic lack of enthusiasm. "I hate those two." After a week of thinking about it, Jan has to admit it would be nice to escape the months of January and February. If we get a place near all these people, but not walking distance, I could be talked into it. By January, Jan and Jan don't need to stay with Beau and Basil. They've got their own place, close to Sun City, but not within the fortress, complete with a saguaro in the front yard. "I could get used to this," says Jan, sitting under a Target Market umbrella in a plastic chase. "In the warm air, Bunny isn't even that annoying. Perhaps she should live here year-round." Before they drove down in the new hybrid, just after a New Year's party they both would rather forget, they arranged to sell another pod to make the down payment. Pod 2, unplugged, December 30th. 75. "Mom, Dad, I'm getting a divorce." Neither Jan nor Jan is particularly saddened by the news. In recent years, when the young couple weren't around, the Jans had settled on calling Aidan's spouse Oscar, after the green, trash-can-dwelling grouch of Sesame Street. This name supplanted earlier favorites, including Dipstick, Rocket Scientist, Lennon, and most recently, Paste. Aidan continued on, "I need to get out of here for a bit. Can the twins and I come stay with you until we get settled elsewhere?" turned out Aiden's a bit meant 2 years, 3 months, a week, and 4 days by Jan's reckoning. It was never stated publicly in the family room, but Jan silently loved having some grandchildren around. Afternoons spent in a folding camp chair watching baseball being played poorly brought back fond memories of Harley and Aiden as children. There was time to enjoy kids now, whereas back then there was always something that needed doing. Best of all, when the twins got tired and cranky or full of candy and pop, Jan simply handed them over to Aiden. Within 18 months, both kids could beat anybody in the house at Liar's Dice. Twin Pods 2 and 3 plugged in November 7th. 80. With Aiden and the twins out of the house, Harley settled outside of D.C., and few visiting house guests, the Jans had already unplugged the temporary pods they rented for Aiden and the twins. The Jans spent time gardening, reading, and attending the twins' various high school games and events. Over the next year, the Jans' investments were slashed by a third as their mutual funds mirrored the free fall of the stock market. Guess that means Sarah advised to invest in income funds. I remember your saying at the time, Sarah is a jackass. Wasn't so stupid after all, Jan said as they were in bed one night. It'll bounce back, said Jan, rolling away. They stopped their magazine subscriptions, sold their golf cart in the shed, went back to buying coffee from a can, and started growing vegetables. They hadn't done vegetables in years, but Jan had to admit Jan had a knack with tomatoes. In the fall, Jan found a tricycle, the kind popular with the elderly set, in a yard sale. This thing is the key to my staying alive, he thought while riding home, especially proud of wheedling that smart-ass kid down to $30. Twin Pods 2 and 3, unplugged May 23rd. 85. Jan really couldn't ignore it anymore. Aiden had mentioned it, socially inept Harley had noticed. Hell, even the twins were showing up frequently, claiming to be driving through the neighborhood. Jan clearly didn't have much time. Bereft of hearing, yet obstinate about wearing an aid, barely able to see, yet unable to keep track of eyeglasses, sleeping much of the time, when not staring vacantly out at the front yard, Jan's life was draining away. Soon he would be little more than a husk. A month before turning 87, Jan passed while sleeping in a living room chair where he had just been watching Jan tend to the tomatoes. Ironically, neither of them could eat tomatoes anymore. The acidity was too much for their aging stomachs. But Aiden, who had always liked greens, sucked up anything the garden produced. The Jans had kept up with the vegetables even after the market rebounded, raising basil, mint, rosemary, green beans, squash, eggplant, hot peppers, and a bunch of jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. Neighborhood tradition dictated these massive beauties be stolen on October 29th, only to reappear on block porches, intricately carved, 2 days later. Many of the jack-o'-lantern kids attended Jan's funeral. One of them scrawled, "Thanks for sponsoring Halloween," in the guest book. Another made sure a jolly pumpkin, lit with a real candle, greeted Jan at her front door when she returned home that night. Perched on the nose of the pumpkin was an old pair of Jan's reading glasses. Pod 1, unplugged, August 10th. 90. At 88, the for sale sign went up in the front yard of the house where Jan had lived for nearly 70 years. "I know it's time, I know, but you're like an old friend now," Jan said, patting the wall and choking up, adding, "I don't have many still alive." Harley and Aiden took care of the closing and moved out the last few boxes. Aiden reminded Harley about the time they had sat atop the second-floor pods, mad at their parents as kids. They'd stayed out until 4 watching their parents go door to door looking for them. In the meantime, they had waited for cars to drive by so they could whack them with rocks. "We never even hit one, and you almost fell off the roof," Harley said, laughing. "What a couple of lousy pictures we'd have made." Before leaving for the airport to fly down to the Phoenix place, Jan planted a handful of tomato seeds she found in a glass jar way in the back of a kitchen cabinet. On the inside, there was a pencil note in Jan's handwriting. It read, "Do-it-yourself kit for the best gazpacho ever to be made." 6 months pregnant, Shay opened the door to Jan's old house, her place now. She whispered to her belly, "It's a new beginning, little baby." Thrilled at having her own place, one she could easily afford, the smile that had crept onto her face when turning the key in the lock stayed put for a full 10 minutes. She hadn't smiled like that in some time. Just you wait until your papa sees this, she thought.